Hey, it's Yay for Yarn, and today I'm going to show you how to crochet the intertwine pullover sweater. So the first thing you'll need for this project is the free written pattern, which you can view by clicking the first link in the description box down below, or you can grab the ad-free PDF version in my shop by visiting the second link in the description box down below. And once you have the written pattern and you're reading through it, then you can go ahead and choose which size of the sweater you're going to make. Now this pattern comes in 9 sizes from a women's extra small to a 5X, and you'll want to select which size you want to make based on the wearer's measurements. Now once you have determined the size you need to make, then you can start choosing yarn. This is the fun part. So this yarn and some of the tools were provided by Knit Picks. So thanks to Knit Picks for providing the yarn and some of the tools for me to design this project. But for this project, I am using this brand new release from Knit Picks, and it is called High Desert. This is the sport weight version, but they also have a worsted version. For this project, you'll need the sport weight version. And this is 100% USA grown and spun yarn. It is super soft, super high quality, springy, smooth. It has a lot of twist to it. It's definitely a luxury wool, and it is super, super nice quality. So if you want to use this particular yarn, I will go ahead and link it down below. Feel free to do that. The pattern will tell you how many skeins you'll need of this yarn. It has 298 yards to 100 grams, by the way. But if you want to substitute, you can do that as well. So if you want to substitute a different yarn, you can do that, but you'll need to make sure that it is, first of all, sport weight, and secondly, it feels nice against the skin. Now, some types of fibers, like plant fiber yarns, will work for this, but the finished fabric will have a little bit of a different drape to it, a different feel to it, just because that's what happens when you totally swap out different fibers. For a substitute, I would definitely recommend something like Knit Picks Wool of the Andes Sport, which is a different line of wool, and it is a more cost-effective yarn. A Brava Sport would work fine as well. I will link a couple of those substitutions down below. But of course, you could use any kind of sport weight yarn that you like the feel of, although it is definitely recommended to swatch first with whatever yarn you want to use if you're substituting, and make sure you like the feel of the fabric and how it drapes. So I have several skeins of this High Desert Sport yarn. And I also have a few other tools here. Some of these are necessary, some of them are not absolutely necessary. You will need a crochet hook. I have the Radiant Wood hook from Knit Picks, and this one is a size 7. It is 4.5 millimeters, so this is the hook I'm using for this project. And you'll also need some scissors, some yarn needles, at least one yarn needle or blunt tapestry needle. You'll need some stitch markers, and these are actually some of the Knit Picks stitch markers, and they have several different varieties here. Some of them are clip stitch markers where it's kind of like a safety pin, and some of them are just round ones that you can put onto knitting needles. For this project, we're going to be using some kind of stitch marker that you can clip onto the work. So it doesn't have to be this exact kind. I think this kind works great, but if you want to, you can use a plastic locking stitch marker. You can use a safety pin, a hairpin. If you don't have any stitch markers, that's fine too. Of course, the zipper pouch is optional, but Knit Picks sent me this to use as well, and I really like the quality of it, so this is optional. The stitch markers are necessary. You need some type of stitch marker. Of course, you need a crochet hook. And the other things that I have here are some blocking pins. These are T-pins. You can use whatever kind of blocking pins that you like, but because this is a natural fiber wool yarn, I'm going to be wet blocking this project. And so you'll want some kind of rust-resistant pins to pin it to your blocking mats if you're blocking any type of natural fiber yarn that you would not steam block. So I do have a video on blocking, which I will link down below, of course. And I also have a bottle of soak wash. And this is a wool wash that is made to be very, very gentle on your handmade projects. So I'm going to be using this when I block my finished piece, but this is optional if you don't have this or don't want to use it. All right, so now that we have all of our supplies, we can get started with the crochet. All right, so we're ready to start. And what we're going to start with is the braid. So this sweater is worked sideways, and we're going to start by making the braid, which we're going to do the front and back and both sleeves all in one piece, by the way. So we're going to make the braid first, which is long enough to go up the front and over the back. And then we're going to be working in lengthwise rows to add the neck opening. And then we're going to continue working back and forth to make the other side of the back and front of the sweater. And then we'll add the sleeve from that side. And then, of course, on this side of the braid, we're going to work back and forth along the edge of this side and then add some more length by adding the sleeve to that side of the sweater. So like I said, we're starting with the braid. Now for the braid, we're making these strips, and these are made with some very stretchy, kind of knit look stitches here. And we're making just very long strips of the stitches called yarn over slip stitch. It's also called half double slip stitch. It's not very difficult to work, and it's not as hard as working into a slip stitch. If you've ever tried that before, it's not that difficult. These are definitely much looser than a slip stitch and not something where you have to try to force the hook into the stitch. So we're going to be making these very long strips, and then we will go ahead and braid them together. And once they are braided and secured and joined, then we will crochet rows onto either side of the braid to add the width for the body on both sides and the sleeves. So I have my hook here, and what we're going to do is we're going to leave at least an 8-inch tail, and we're going to make our slip knot. And we're going to chain 2. So into that first chain, we're going to work a foundation single crochet. Now we're using foundation single crochet for this because it allows us to work both the foundation chain and the first row of single crochet at the same time. And what that does is that makes the edge much more stretchy and pliable, which is what we want when we're going to be braiding these strips and making them bend. So for that first foundation single crochet stitch, I'm going to insert my hook into the very first chain, yarn over, pull up a loop. Then we're going to yarn over, pull through 1 loop to make the chain part, and yarn over, pull through 2 loops to make the single crochet. So now I can go ahead and pull my yarn tail to tighten up that first chain. But that is the first foundation single crochet stitch. And if you look closely, you can kind of see how there's a chain across the bottom and then a single crochet on top of it. Now we're not using single crochet for the rest of our braid as far as the following rows, but this first row of foundation single crochet will be about the same height as the rows of yarn over slip stitch. So for all the following foundation single crochet stitches, we're going to turn the base edge of the piece over. So we're looking at the bottom of the previous stitch, and then we're going to insert our hook into the base of the previous stitch. You can see how there are 2 strands in the base of that stitch. Looks kind of like the top of a regular stitch. Then we'll yarn over, pull up a loop, yarn over, pull through 1 loop for the chain part, and yarn over, pull through 2 loops for the single crochet. Now, one thing you want to be careful of is as you make that chain, you're going to insert, of course, into the base of the previous stitch, yarn over, pull up a loop. You want to make sure that when you yarn over and pull up the first loop, you want to kind of give it a little stretch. You want to make sure it's loose enough. Then we'll yarn over, pull through 1 loop to make the chain, yarn over, pull through 2 loops. Now, if you're not familiar with this technique, I will go ahead and link my video on foundation stitches down below. But again, we're going to insert the hook into the base of the previous stitch, yarn over, pull up a loop, make sure we stretch it a little bit. Don't need to stretch the top loop, just stretch the first loop that we pull up from the base of the previous stitch. Make sure that it's loose enough. Yarn over, pull through 1 loop to make the chain, and yarn over, pull through 2 loops to make the single crochet. So of course, the numbers will vary depending on which size you're making, but for the size that I'm making, which I'm making the extra small, I'm going to need a total of 278 foundation single crochet in this first row. So just follow the written instructions, whether you're looking at the free version or the PDF version of the pattern. Just follow the written instructions for whichever size that you're making, and it will tell you all the numbers that you need to follow to make it in that size. So I'm going to continue working more foundation single crochet stitches until I have worked a total of 278 stitches, including the very first foundation single crochet, but not including the chain stitch at the beginning of the row. Alright, so I finished working my row of foundation single crochet, and now we're going to move on to the rows of back loop only yarn over slip stitch, and this is not as hard as it sounds to work. So first I'm going to go ahead and take the stitch markers that I've put on here off. I've just used these to mark every 50 stitches to make it easier to count such a long piece as far as how many stitches you have, but you don't have to do that. That's just a little trick that I like to use. So at least once you've marked every 50 stitches, that makes it a lot easier to know where you're at if you lose count and have to start over. Alright, and you can also see, if you kind of pull on your piece here, how stretchy and pliable that foundation single crochet is. And that's why we've used it in this application here. So now we're ready to move on to row 1 of the braid. And what we're going to do is chain 1 and turn the work. And in the back loop only of every stitch across, but first in this very same stitch that the chain is coming from. So in the back loop only of the same stitch the chain is coming from, we're going to work a yarn over slip stitch, or a half double slip stitch. In this pattern, I'm calling it a yarn over slip stitch. So this is what I'm referring to. So we're going to yarn over, insert the hook into the back loop only of that stitch. Then we're going to yarn over, pull up a loop, and then pull that loop through both loops on the hook. So we're going to work a yarn over slip stitch in the back loop only of every stitch across. So we'll yarn over, insert into the back loop only of the next stitch, yarn over, pull up a loop, and pull that loop through both loops on the hook. Now this could also be described as pulling a loop through the stitch and all the loops on the hook, but for me personally, I don't really think it is as easy to pull it through everything at once, because that yarn over ends up sliding up the throat space of the hook, and then it doesn't actually get large enough where you can pull it through. So I like to pull it through the stitch first, and then it especially helps if you take your finger and just kind of grab the base of that yarn over right there, then pull it through both loops on the hook. And holding on to the yarn over, so I've yarned over, insert into the stitch in the back loop only. Now I'm going to pull up a loop through the stitch, and I'm going to pull that loop through both loops on the hook. But if you kind of just pinch the base of that yarn over right there, it helps keep it open so that you can pull the strand through easily. So again, yarn over, insert into the back loop only of the next stitch, pull up a loop through the stitch, and then pull that loop through both loops on the hook. And once you get the hang of this, it's really not that difficult to do, and it can get a little quicker. So what we're going to do is work a yarn over slip stitch in the back loop only of every single stitch across, and when you finish the row, you should still have 278 stitches. If you're making one of the sizes that has that number, of course check the pattern, because some of the sizes have a different number of stitches. But point being, you should have the same number of stitches that was in your foundation single crochet row. So this is what we're doing for rows 1 to 6. So once I get all the way to the end of my foundation single crochet row, we're going to stop after we've worked into the back loop only of the last stitch. We're not going to work into any chain 1 space from the previous row, because we're not counting that chain 1 as a stitch here. So once I get to the end of the row, then I'm going to work that same row 5 more times for a total of 6 rows of yarn over slip stitch in the back loop only. So once we finished those rows of yarn over slip stitch in the back loop only, then that section of your braid will be finished. We're going to need a total of 3 braid sections, and then we're going to go ahead and join them together. Alright, so I've finished making all 3 sections of my braid, and now we're ready to assemble the braid. So once we finish assembling our braid, then we're going to work off each side of the braid to add the main portions of our pullover. So first up, we want to lay our strips with the right side facing up. Now, if you look at each side of the braid, you can see how that one side has evenly spaced grooves and the foundation single crochet edge looks about the same width as the other ridges, whereas on the other side, the foundation single crochet edge and the first row do not have a gap in between. So this is the wrong side. You can see how there's only 2 ridges and there's not a ridge in between the foundation edge and the first row. So we're going to make sure we lay all of our strips out so that the right side is facing up and we have evenly spaced ridges on the top of our braid section. So I'm going to go ahead and lay these out so that there are 3 of them next to each other. Now, if your pieces have a little bit of a twist or a curl to them at this point, that's okay. They haven't been blocked yet, but that will smooth out and even out once they're blocked. And it will also pretty much go away most of the way once we work into our braid. So what we're going to do is take the yarn tails and stitch just the ends a little ways together to hold them together before we start braiding our piece. So for the left and center sections, I'm going to join those 2 together using whichever yarn tail is closest to that space. So I'm going to grab this tail, thread it through my yarn needle, and we're going to stitch these together. Now, for the left and center sections, to join them, we're going to stitch through the first 19 pairs of stitches, okay? So that means that we're going to join 19 stitches from this side to 19 stitches from this side. And this is part of the reason why it is so handy to have that foundation single crochet edge, because it's really easy to stitch into and work into later, which we will be doing after we've assembled the braid. So I've worked into 3 stitches, 4, 5, and I'm just grabbing a stitch from each side as I stitch the, or as I pull the needle through. So I'm going to continue stitching these 2 edges together until I have worked into 19 stitches total. Alright, so I've joined the left and center sections together, joining 19 stitches in our seam. And now we're going to do the same thing on the next section, but with fewer stitches. So I'm going to join the right section to the center section, but I'm only going to join 10 stitches. So same thing here, we're just going to whip stitch the edges together, grabbing 1 stitch for each side, until we've joined 10 stitches. We'll go ahead and insert the needle in the same place again and make a knot right there, and then we'll weave in this tail. Now I like to weave them into the seam that I just made, because those whip stitches are tight enough to secure the yarn tail, even though we're not going to weave it in for a super long distance through the fabric. It's only a couple inches or less, but those whip stitches are pretty snug and they can securely keep that yarn tail from getting loose. Alright, so here's what our piece looks like thus far. We have them unevenly stitched together, and this is because we're going to start braiding them, and if they were evenly stitched together, then the braid would not flow as smoothly from the end of our piece. Alright, so now we're ready to start braiding, and what we're going to do is we're going to I like to kind of keep the strands of the braid together in a little wad so that they do not get tangled as easily. So I'm just kind of gonna smush the end of it all into one blob and be able to just hold on to each section with my whole hand instead of having the length of it just hanging and getting tangled up as we braid. So for our first braid stitch, we're going to take the right section and cross it over the center section, and then we'll take the left section and cross it over the center section. So we've made one braid stitch there. We've crossed the right section over the center and then the left section over the center. And for instruction's sake, we're counting that as one braid stitch. So I'm going to repeat that braid stitch several more times depending on which size you're making, but since I'm making the extra small for that size, the pattern says to repeat the braid stitch 12 more times. So I'm going to cross the right section over the center and then cross the left section over the center 12 more times after I've already did it once up here. So it doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to be perfectly even because we can adjust it and tweak it later. So we just want to have the correct number of braid stitches in our braid. So I've repeated it once, and now I've repeated it twice. And of course you want to make sure that your braid strands, each section of your braid, is relatively flat. So I'm going to keep doing that until I have worked all the braid stitches I need for this size, and then we will join the ends of our strands together. Alright, so I have braided all the way down the length of my strips, and I have worked the correct number of braid stitches for the size that I'm making. So now we're going to join the pieces together at the other end of the braid. Now, I have braided the correct number of stitches, but I do have a little bit of extra room here, but you can totally readjust the braid after we join the ends together. So I'm going to grab my yarn needle again, and I'm going to join the center section to the right section and join 19 stitches together. So same as we did at the top, but we're just going to do it down here at the bottom. And I'm going to stitch 19 stitches together on the center and right sections. And now I'm going to join the left and center sections together, stitching only 10 stitches from each side. Alright, so now I have joined the ends of the braid together, and if you need to, you can of course go back and adjust your braid a little bit. Of course, mine is not laying perfectly smooth right now because it is kind of bent on the table here. But once your braid is relatively even and smooth, we're going to start working into the side edges of it. So one more thing we want to do to our braid before we start working into the side of it is we're going to put a stitch marker on the top somewhere, it doesn't matter where in the length, but on the top surface of our braid to mark which side is the right side. Alright, so now we're going to move to the end of the braid, one end of the braid. And we want to make sure that we have the right side of our braid facing up, and we're now going to start working a row along the edge of our braid to create the right side of the pullover, the right side when it's worn, not when it's laying flat in front of you. So if you look at the end of the braid, the edge of the braid section on one side is longer than the edge of the braid section on the other side. So on the longer side, we're going to join yarn in the very first stitch of this edge. So I've got the yarn here. I'm going to insert into the first stitch of this edge, and then we can pull up a loop. And we're going to begin row 1 by chaining 2. So I also have 2 yarn tails here that are just hanging, and I'm going to go ahead and crochet over those across this row. So we're going to half double crochet in the back loop only of the same stitch that our chain is coming from, because we're not counting that chain 2 as a stitch. And for the size that I'm making, we're going to half double crochet in the back loop only of the next 26 stitches. Alright, there's that 26th stitch. So if we lay this down flat now, you can see that we are right about at the point, if I move my tails out of the way, we're right about at the point where we need to start working into the next piece of the braid here, the next braid section along this edge. So I'm going to go ahead and continue carrying my yarn tails. And we're going to half double crochet in the back loop only of the next 15 stitches from the next braid section edge. So I'm going to start with the stitch that is the closest. It's on the edge and it's sticking out from behind the piece that's on top of it here, but it is the closest to the stitch that I just made. And I'm going to work into the back loop only of that stitch. And of course, we're going to do a total of 15 stitches into this edge. All right, so I've worked into 15 stitches on the edge of this section, and I'm going to go ahead and trim my yarn tails here. And as you can see, I've worked to those 15 stitches, and now I'm up to the place where we can begin working into the next braid section. So as I go along the edge of this braid, I'm going to half double crochet in the back loop only of the next 15 stitches along the edge of the next braid. Then I'll come to this part and half double crochet in the back loop only of the next 15 stitches along the edge of this piece, and continue doing that all the way across until I have repeated this section 11 more times for the size that I'm making. Again, check the pattern for instructions for the size you're making, and then we will be down to the end of the braid. So I'm going to go ahead and continue repeating that section right there until I am down to the last little bit of the braid and I have worked that set of instructions the correct number of times for the size that I'm making. Alright, so I have made it down where I've worked into the very last edge right here that is a braid stitch. So I've got 15 stitches in each one of these, and this is the last one. Now we're moving on to this last section before the end of the row. So to finish out the row, we're going to half double crochet in the back loop only of the last 19 stitches on this section right here. So that means we're going to count in from the edge 19 stitches in, and we're going to begin work in that 19th stitch. So I'm going to half double crochet in the back loop only of the 19th stitch from the edge and all the stitches following, so that we are working into the last 19 stitches of this section. So we've now worked a row of half double crochet across the entire edge of the braid on this side. Now we're going to move on to row 2. Now if you're concerned at all about the braid being loose when it's kind of bunched up like this, or being open, I should say, once we've worked along the other side of the braid on the next section, here's our stitch marker for the right side, it got tucked in there. Anyway, once we've worked along the other edge for the other side of the section on the other side of the braid, then what we're going to do is actually flip this over and stitch closed the gaps in the braid on the back of the braid. So we won't have to worry about this pulling open at all while the garment is worn. So now that we finished row 1, let's go ahead and start row 2. So for row 2, we're going to chain 1 and turn the work. And if you've ever worked the griddle stitch before, this will look familiar because this is the griddle stitch. So we're going to single crochet in the same stitch from where the chain is coming from. So single crochet in the same stitch, then we're going to double crochet in the next stitch. And then our sequence to repeat all the way to the end is to single crochet in the next stitch, double crochet in the next stitch, single crochet in the next stitch, double crochet in the next stitch. And we're going to just repeat this sequence all the way across the row. And this stitch gives a very subtle but lovely texture to the fabric. So I'm going to go ahead and work the rest of this row by working a single crochet in the next stitch and then a double crochet in the next stitch and repeating that little sequence of instructions all the way across. Alright, so I've finished working row 2 all the way across, and now what we're going to do is repeat row 2. So for the size that I'm making, I need to repeat row 2 12 more times, but again, as always, check the pattern instructions to know how many times to work everything for the size you're making. So I'm going to go ahead and repeat row 2 12 more times, and then we'll move on to working into the other side of the braid. All right, so I finished working the rows on this side of the braid, and what we're going to do now is cut the yarn, and we're leaving a tail about a yard long, maybe a little over that, just to have a little extra if you want to, but we're going to leave a tail and tie off. So that is the end of this side of our body panel. So now we're going to join yarn along the other side of the braid and start working across this side of the braid to create what's left of the right half of our body, the pullover body. And then we're going to make a slit for the neck opening and continue on to create the rest of the pullover body. So what I'm going to do is I still have the right side of my braid facing up. I'm going to turn it around this way so that now the unworked edge of the braid is in front of me. And now I'm going to join yarn at this corner of the braid right here. And we're going to work exactly the same instructions for row 1 and 2 that we did on this side. So I'm going to repeat basically row 1 from this side where we worked half double crochets into the edge of the braid, and then row 2, which is exactly the same as the row 2 that we did on this side. So of course you want to refer to the written instructions for the step-by-step info, but rows 1 and 2 on this side of the braid are exactly the same as rows 1 and 2 on this side of the braid. So I'm going to go ahead and work rows 1 and 2 on this side of the braid to work that first row of half double crochet along the edge of the braid, and then the first row of griddle stitch. And then I'm going to go ahead and repeat row 2 7 more times for the size that I'm making. As usual, check the pattern instructions for the number of the size that you're making. So I'm going to go ahead and do that, and then we will move on to row 3, which will begin our neck opening. All right, so now I've finished repeating row 2 on this side of the braid, and the next step is to make the slit for the neck opening, and we're going to do this with 2 rows. So for row 3, I'm going to go ahead and chain 1. I'm going to single crochet in the same stitch and double crochet in the next stitch. All right, now for the size that I'm making, I'm going to repeat this little sequence of single crochet in the next stitch, double crochet in the next stitch, a total of 48 times. So I've just done it once. Again, single crochet in the next stitch, double crochet in the next stitch. And by the time we finish doing that 48 times, that will bring us to the point along our piece where we're going to start working the neck opening. Now, at this point on this particular row, we're not actually making the slit yet, but what we're doing is making the edge on the one side of the slit match what the edge will look like on the other side of the slit. So I'm going to go ahead and repeat the sequence of single crochet in the next stitch and double crochet in the next stitch until I've worked that a total of 48 times, and then we will move on to the next part of the row. Alright, so I've finished working up to that point, and the next step for the size that I'm making is to single crochet in the next 46 stitches. So we're doing just plain single crochet here, and the reason for this is because when we make the other side of the neck slit, we're going to be using foundation single crochet for the other edge. So by working single crochet along this side of the opening, it will make the edges match as opposed to having one edge smooth and the other edge kind of bumpy from the griddle stitch. Alright, so that is 46 single crochet, and next I'm going to go ahead and just continue working that single crochet, double crochet pattern until I get to the end of the row. Alright, so that was the end of row 3. Now we're ready to move on to row 4. So for row 4, I'm going to chain 1 and turn the work, and then I'm going to single crochet in the same stitch and double crochet in the next stitch. So what we're going to do next is we're going to work that sequence of single crochet in the next stitch, double crochet in the next stitch 40 times. So single crochet in the next stitch, double crochet in the next stitch. I'm going to do that 40 times total. Alright, there's the 40th time. And what we're going to do next is we're going to work a row of foundation single crochet to create the other edge of the neck opening. So I'm going to go ahead and insert my hook into the base of the stitch I just made. So right here where I just worked that last stitch, I'm going to insert my hook there again, yarn over, pull up a loop, and we're basically working a foundation single crochet into that stitch, like so. And now working into the previous foundation single crochet stitch, and now working into the foundation single crochet, I'm going to work 45 more foundation single crochet. All right, so that is my total of 46 foundation single crochet. And what we're going to do is we're going to come over here and join that to create the other side of this neck opening. So we're going to join our strip of foundation single crochet over here to finish out the row and have that neck slit there. So to join this, what we're going to do is insert the hook into the base of the previous foundation single crochet. Then we're going to yarn over and pull up a loop. So here's what we have at this point. Now what we're going to do is skip along this edge. We're going to skip the next 46 stitches of the previous row. And then once we've skipped those stitches, we're going to insert into the next stitch of the previous row, and this is where we're joining. So now we're going to yarn over, pull the loop through the stitch and the first loop on the hook, so that we now have 2 loops left, and then we'll yarn over and pull through both remaining loops on the hook. So that is the equivalent of a single crochet, but we've joined the foundation edge of our row of foundation single crochet to that stitch at the same time. So now I'm going to double crochet in the next stitch. So to finish out this row, we're going to single crochet in the next stitch, double crochet in the next stitch, all the way to the end. Alright, so that is the end of row 4, and you can see how we have our neck slit over here in the middle. It's kind of in the middle. It's a little bit offset from the center because we want the neck opening to be a little deeper in the front than in the back. But here's our neck slit. And what we're going to do to finish out the rest of this panel is, depending on which size you're making, we're going to keep repeating row 2. So for the size that I'm making, I need to repeat row 2 37 more times, and then I'll tie off and leave a tail at least 1 yard long. Alright, so I finished repeating row 2 the correct number of times for the size that I'm making. So now I'm going to cut the yarn, leaving a tail at least 1 yard long. And then I'm going to tie off. So we have now finished the body panel of the sweater as far as the crochet goes. But now we're going to move on to one more step before we add the sleeves and do the side seams and all that. What we're going to do is we're going to turn our piece over. Remember, we marked the right side of the braid. Here is our right side, right? So we have our marker here. This is the right side of the piece. So we're looking at the right side of our piece. Now, when this is worn, this braid will be running vertically up one side of the sweater. But what happens if we stretch this piece with the braid the way it is right now? It opens up and there's gaps in between the strands. So what we're going to do is we're going to, from the wrong side, we're going to stitch the braid together with a yarn needle and some extra yarn to secure the braid so that it does not stretch like this when the person wearing it is moving around. So I'm going to go ahead and flip it over so that the wrong side is facing up. And I'm going to go ahead and grab my yarn needle and a length of yarn at least 2 yards long. Alright, so what we're going to do is we're going to start at one end of the braid, and we are going to stitch in between here. So I'm going to join my yarn, and you want to do this with the piece laying on a flat surface so that it does not get distorted at all if you lay it just on your lap. Alright, so here's the end of my braid down here, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to come to this first gap right here. We want to kind of stretch it lengthwise so that it is laying flat and smooth. And I'm going to start right here where there's a gap, And right on the edge of this piece right here, I'm going to stitch this edge to, basically we're stitching a line to join this edge to this piece right here, but we're only stitching this on the back. So basically we're not stitching, we're not taking the needle through the whole thickness of the fabric on this underneath strand. So right here, we're going to be grabbing the entire edge for each of these stitches along the edge. But when we go through this piece, we're only going to be picking up yarn off the surface of the fabric. We're not going all the way through and then coming back up, because then that would be visible on the other side of the work. So I'm going to start down here, and I'm going to grab, making sure again that this is totally flat, I'm going to grab the first stitch and a strand of yarn from the edge right here. And once I have a tail, I'm going to go ahead and tie the tail together with the working yarn to secure that tail, and we can come back and weave it in later. So what I'm doing here is basically I'm going to pick up a stitch from the edge of the piece that's on top, and then I'm going to pick up like maybe one strand of yarn on the layer underneath, the thickness of the braid that is underneath. And what we're doing is essentially a whip stitch. We're just not going all the way through the second layer of the fabric. So this is kind of an idea of what our stitch should look like. We're picking up the edge of the strand that's currently on top and just a strand of yarn from the layer that is underneath. So the goal here is just to get this to lay smooth and flat and be connected completely so that it's a solid fabric with no gaps. All right, so we've come basically to where the next intersection is, where these pieces are overlapping each other. There's not really a gap left here. So what I'm going to do is just make sure that this next strand is smooth. And then I'm going to go ahead and start, I'm going to first join the edge of this strand to the edge of the next one. And then we're going to start coming over here and picking up the edge of this piece of the braid, and then only picking up a single strand from the edge of the one underneath it. All right, so I'm to the next intersection here. And you can see how that, although it does kind of flatten the 3D look of the braid on this side of the work, on the right side of the work, the 3D look is preserved, but when you stretch the piece, it does not pull it open the same way that it has been before we stitch this closed. So I'm going to go ahead and continue this seam, joining the braid together, and I'm just going to zigzag up the middle. We don't need to follow it all the way to the edge because these layers are overlapping. The main part that separates is in the center here. And the edge pieces are held down by the crochet that is worked into both sides. So we are closing up these gaps in between. So we are going to smooth this out and just zigzag our way from one end of the braid to the other. So I'm going to go ahead and continue doing that. And then once I finish that seam, I will go ahead and tie off, and then I'll show you what it looks like. All right, so I've finished seaming all the way up the wrong side of the braid, and I have finished down here. So now if we stretch the braid, it does not come apart in the middle. So what we're going to do to finish off this panel is weave in the yarn tails for the braid seam, but we're going to leave the long yarn tails at the corners. And then we're going to go ahead and block the body panel. Now the reason for this is because it's a lot easier to block something when it's flat, especially if you're wet blocking, than when it is finished. So you can, if you really want to, wait until the whole thing is finished before you block your piece. But I personally prefer and recommend to block the flat body panel first. Then we will assemble and add sleeves and then block the sleeves later. So if you're not familiar with blocking, I do have a video on that, which I will link down below. But because this yarn is a pure wool yarn, and it is not superwash, I'm going to go ahead and wet block my panel. So that means I'm going to get it wet, very gently squeeze out the excess water, and then I'm going to lay this out on foam blocking mats and pin it to the mats so that it will be able to dry laying flat at the measurements that it should finish at. So I'm going to pin this out when it's wet onto the mats with the correct measurements for the finished panel, and then we will let that dry and we will assemble and add the sleeves after the piece is dry. And by the way, after we've done this braid seam, once we flip it over, we have not lost the 3D texture element to the front of the piece. All we've done is secure the back so that it does not gape open when we stretch it. Alright, so the main panel of my piece is blocked, and now what we're going to do is sew the side seams and leave an opening for the sleeves, and then we will join yarn around that sleeve opening and work our sleeves from there. So as you can see, we have a center slit here in our piece, and that slit is offset to one side, and that's because it needs to be lower in the front than in the back. So what I'm going to do is turn this over so that the wrong side of the braid is facing up. And you can see here where we have hand stitched the braid together so that it is not going to stretch open. Then we're going to bring the ends of it together, the ends of our panel. So I'm bringing the two ends of the braid here and here together. So now the right side of the braid is facing out. So if I turn this sideways here, you can kind of see how that we folded this in half, and over here is our neck slit, and this right here is the front because the slit is deeper in the front than it is in the back. So what we're going to do is line up the side edges here, and then we're going to stitch the sides together. So I'm going to start at one side, and I'm just going to come to this side right here, come to the bottom corner, and thread this long yarn tail into my yarn needle. And then we're going to take these two edges, the front and back edges, and we are going to whip stitch these edges together up the sides of our sweater. So what we're going to do is we're going to stitch these edges together and stop when we have a certain number of stitches remaining around the opening. So this is just a simple whip stitch, but I'm going to continue doing this, seaming these two side edges together until I come to the place where there are 56 stitches for the size that I'm making left around this opening, because we're going to continue seaming up this edge. We're going to stop at a certain point when there are a certain number of stitches, depending on which size you're making, left around the opening that have not been joined together. So I'm going to continue whip stitching up the side of my sweater here. And for the size that I'm making, I'm going to stop when there are 56 stitches left around the opening. And then I'll tie off and weave in the yarn tail, and of course do the same seam on the other side. Alright, so I've got my side seams done so that now the front and back are connected together at the side seams on both sides of our panel. Here's our neck opening up here. And now we have two openings for the sleeves. Now, at this point, the sleeve openings might look a little small, but this is not the same depth as like an entire armhole, because this piece will extend over the shoulder a little bit, kind of like a drop shoulder. So this only has to be big enough for the upper arm, and it does not have to be a deep enough opening to run from the top of the shoulder to the base of the armhole, because this is not the same kind of armhole that you would normally have on a garment with a set-in sleeve. So now that we have these two openings on the sides of our piece, we're going to join yarn around the edge of each opening and work the sleeve. So I'm going to start on this side, and I'm going to go ahead and open this up so that you can see the opening here. Alright, so here is our opening, and we're going to join yarn in the edge down here by where we stopped sewing. Now, when we're looking at this, since we do have it with the right side facing out, you can see the right side of the braid here that has not been stitched down is on the outside. Now, around the opening here, the very last row that runs around this whole edge has the back of that last row facing out, and that's what we want. So if we come down here to where the split is, where we've joined it together and stopped, either the stitch on one side, the first stitch that has not been sewn into on one side, or the stitch that has not been sewn into on the other side of that seam is going to be a double crochet. So you can tell which one is a double crochet because even though it's from behind, you're looking at the back of the stitch, the single crochet is a lot shorter. The double crochet, although it does not appear to be that much taller, it's kind of scrunched down in length. So again, we're looking at not the stitches that we've sewn into, but the stitch on either side of that seam. So on this piece right here, this stitch on the left is the double crochet. So I'm going to join yarn into that stitch. And you want to leave a 6 to 8 inch tail. So because we're going to be working in the round now, we're going to be using my technique that I call the invisible join method. And with this technique, we're going to be working a chainless starting stitch instead of chaining one at the beginning of each round. And then at the end of each round, we're going to join with an invisible slip stitch. And this helps make that line that you normally get when you join in the round kind of disappear so that you can't really see it. So to start with that chainless starting single crochet, I'm going to stretch the loop on my hook a little bit and basically work a regular single crochet in the same stitch. So by stretching the top loop before we work the stitch, it gives enough room for that top loop to kind of come up the side of the stitch and then fold over onto the top of the stitch. And then that way we don't have to chain, but we still have enough room that we can join into that, and it's not going to be pulling the stitch at an angle to be kind of diagonal. All right, so there's my chainless starting single crochet. Now I'm going to work a double crochet in the next stitch. So all the way around, I'm going to work a sequence of single crochet in the next stitch, double crochet in the next stitch, single crochet in the next stitch, double crochet in the next stitch. And I'm just crocheting over my tail, so I don't have to weave it in later, but I'm going to repeat that single crochet, double crochet sequence until I get all the way around to the end of my round, and I will be stopping. The last stitch that I work into will be the last stitch before the pair of stitches that is joined together down here in our seam. All right, there's my last stitch, and it will kind of appear that there is a bit of a gap in between the last stitch we're working and the first stitch that we did in this round. But that's okay. We're just going to close it up when we join the round because what's left here is something that we're not working into. That is the 2 stitches that were joined at the very end of the seam. We're not working into those. So now we're going to finish the round with an invisible slip stitch. So I have more information and videos on the chainless starting single crochet and the invisible slip stitch, and I will link those down below. But to work the invisible slip stitch, what we're going to do is we're going to stretch the loop on the hook and let go of it. We stretch it out so that it doesn't get unraveled easily. And then we're going to come over here to the chainless starting single crochet, which is this stitch right here, the first stitch of our round. Now normally when we work into a stitch, we insert the hook from front to back. We're going to take our hook and bring it over to the back and insert the hook into that chainless starting single crochet from back to front. Then we're going to take that stretched out loop and put it over the hook again and pull it through the chainless starting single crochet from front to back. So then once that gets kind of pulled together, then it kind of closes up that gap a little bit more. Then our round is joined. So for the following rounds, we're going to turn the work at the end or at the beginning of each round, because we want to make the fabric on the sleeve match the fabric on the rest of the sweater. And because we turned and worked back and forth in rows for the rest of the sweater, we're going to turn every time we work around for the sleeve. So that was round 1, where we first work around the edge of the sleeve opening. Now we're going to work the plain round, which is very similar. But what we're going to do is we're going to have plain rounds and decrease rounds. And the decrease rounds are the ones where we remove stitches or we decrease stitches so that the sleeve will gradually taper and get narrower towards the cuff. So we're going to work a few plain rounds first, and then we're going to start working the decrease rounds in and spacing them out. And of course the pattern gives instructions on exactly how to do that. We'll get to that in just a minute. But now we're ready to work the plain round. So for the plain round, we're going to begin with a chainless starting single crochet. So right here where the yarn is coming out of, not the loop, where the working yarn is coming from, that's the stitch we're going to start in because that is the first stitch of this round. So I'm again going to stretch the loop on my hook slightly and then work a single crochet in that first stitch. Then I'm going to work a double crochet in the next stitch. So we've got our chainless starting single crochet right here, and then we have a double crochet, and then we're going to work that sequence of single crochet in the next stitch, double crochet in the next stitch all the way around. Alright, and now I am back to the beginning. We've made it all the way around. You can kind of see how that our chainless starting single crochet folds forward a little bit, and it appears as though you could just spiral around and keep going. But we're not going to do that. We're going to work the invisible slip stitch into the top of that chainless starting single crochet. The reason it kind of tips forward is because the loop that we stretched out before we began was coming from over to the side and not from the exact stitch that we worked into. So we're working into the first stitch of the round, but the loop was coming out of the last stitch of the round that we joined into. So again, I'm going to stretch the loop on my hook, let go of it, then I'm going to insert my hook into that chainless starting single crochet from back to front and pull the stretched out loop through from front to back. So there is my invisible slip stitch. So depending on which size you're making, you may need to repeat that plain round a couple more times before we begin the decrease round. So for the size that I'm making, I'm going to go ahead and repeat the plain round 2 more times, and then we'll start working on the decrease round. Alright, so I finished my plain rounds, and I actually forgot to mention earlier that if you want to, you can use your yarn tail instead of crocheting over it to stitch close this tiny little gap here that is at the base of the sleeve where the side seam meets the sleeve. So if you want to do that, then you'll want to leave your yarn tail out. Use the tail to stitch that little gap closed after you finish round 1, and then you can weave it in. But that is optional because this little tiny gap is small enough that you don't have to stitch it closed if you don't want to. Alright, so I've worked the plain round the correct number of times for the size that I'm making so far, and now we're going to move on to the decrease round. So for the decrease round, I'm going to begin with a chainless starting single crochet, then I'm going to double crochet in the next stitch as usual. Then we're going to work that sequence of single crochet in the next stitch, double crochet in the next stitch around until we have 4 stitches left in the round to work into. Alright, so I've got 4 stitches left in the round to work into. So now what we're going to do is work our decreases. So I'm going to work a single crochet 2 together and then a double crochet 2 together. So to single crochet 2 together, I'm going to insert my hook into the first stitch, yarn over, pull up a loop, insert my hook into the second stitch, yarn over, pull up a loop, then I'm going to yarn over, pull through 3 loops. That brings 2 stitches together into 1. And now we're going to work the double crochet 2 together. So to do that, I'm going to yarn over, insert my hook into the next stitch, yarn over, pull up a loop, yarn over, pull through 2 loops. So we've basically worked a double crochet up to the last step. Then we're going to yarn over, insert into the next stitch, yarn over, pull up a loop, yarn over, pull through 2 loops. So we have 2 half finished double crochets, and then we'll yarn over, pull through all 3 to finish that out. And then to finish up our decrease round, we're going to go ahead and join with the invisible slip stitch. So what we've just done is we have decreased 2 stitches. We worked 2 decreases, both a single crochet 2 together and a double crochet 2 together, and that has removed 2 stitches from our total count. So you can see how the sleeve is kind of beginning to extend off the side here. So what we're going to do is we're going to work a sequence so that we do a certain number of plain rounds and then a decrease round, and then a certain number of plain rounds and then a decrease round. So for the size that I'm making, I'm going to work 6 plain rounds and then 1 decrease round. And that set of 6 plain rounds and then 1 decrease round, we're going to repeat that a bunch of times depending on which size you're making. So for the size that I'm making, I'm going to repeat that sequence of rounds 8 more times after I have finished doing it the first time. So I'm going to go ahead and work 6 plain rounds, 1 decrease round, and then I'll repeat that section 8 more times until I have decreased all the stitches that need to be decreased and my sleeve is almost to its finished length. So once I have repeated that sequence the correct number of times for the size that I'm making, then I will work 6 more plain rounds. But depending on which size you're making, the decrease rounds will be spaced differently. So for some of the sizes, you will work fewer plain rounds between each decrease round. So just follow the instructions for the size you're making. I'm going to go ahead and work that sequence once and then repeat it the correct number of times for the size that I'm making. And then we will have our sleeve basically finished. Alright, so I have finished up my sleeve here. So I just went ahead and used some stitch markers to mark every time I did a decrease round, so that makes it easier to go back and count how many you've already done. So I have 1 here. This was the first time we did a decrease round. Then I did 6 plain rows and 1 decrease round, which is this one. And then, according to the pattern instructions for the size that I'm making, I needed to repeat that sequence 8 more times. So I did it 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 more times. And then I worked 6 more plain rows according to the instructions for the size that I'm making. So now that the sleeve is finished, I can go ahead and weave in the yarn tail, remove all the stitch markers, and then I can move on to the other armhole and create the other sleeve by using the exact same instructions that we did for this sleeve, just on the other side of the sweater. So I'm going to go ahead and do that, and then we'll talk about blocking the sleeves. Alright, so now I have done both sleeves and I've woven in my ends. And the final step once you have made the sleeves is to block the sleeves. You probably want to block the sleeves with the same method you used to block the body. But if you are wet blocking the sleeves, what you can do is just dip the sleeves only, put the sleeves only into a bowl of water. Of course, you know, they're attached to the body of the sweater. But if you've kind of folded it in half, where you just fold it over and then you have the sleeves together on one side, you can just lay them in a bowl of water. And then once they are fully saturated with water, then of course you can squeeze out the extra and then lay out the sleeves on your blocking mat, pin them out, and let them dry. But of course, if you're just steam blocking your entire piece, then you would just steam block the sleeves as well. So once you have blocked the sleeves, then the sweater is technically finished, but there's one more step you might want to take. This is kind of a personal preference thing, depending on which size you've chosen. So if you are in between sizes and you've chosen to choose the smaller size of the two for a more fitted sweater, then you might want to take this extra step. If not, and if you feel like you have enough ease in the sweater, then you don't have to do this. But if you are wearing this with very little ease, then what can happen is, even though we stitched the braid closed on the back, then when you stretch, you can still get little gaps in between the openings. So it won't be anywhere near as much as if we had left the entire braid unstitched, but there can be some little gaps in between the openings. So if you prefer, you can go through, and I have done this, to go back and stitch very lightly, just tacking the layers together. So what I've done here is I've taken a length of yarn, and everywhere where the braids overlap, I have just gently taken a couple of loose stitches to tack the top layer of the braid down to the one underneath it so that it will not come open at all. And I've also taken an extra stitch in between so that it just cannot make any holes at all. Again, if you're wearing this with the amount of ease that is given in the pattern, so for example, if you choose a size that either matches your measurement for the to fit bust section, or if you are sizing up for a more loose fitting sweater, then you may not need to do this. But I've just gone ahead and tacked the top layer of the braid down along those edges. And another thing you can do if you want to, this is optional again, is sometimes if the sweater is snug fitting, the gaps in between right here could open up as you move. So right here, there's a little gap where we worked a row of half double crochet in between, and we moved from the piece we were working into and started working into the next section of the braid. So you can come through and stitch those gaps closed if you want to. So I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you liked it, please give it a thumbs up. If you make this project, let me know how it turns out for you in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe, making sure you click the little bell next to the subscribe button to be notified of new videos. Thanks for watching.